My name is Alexandra Lapp, and I will be presenting the case involving the Board of Education of the City of New York versus Tom Freston on behalf of Gilbert Freston, Tom Freston's son and minor child. Ultimately, this case was considered by the U.S. Supreme Court. The main question of this case is, does the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act allow for public tuition reimbursement for private school for a child that has not previously received special education from a public school? The case involved Gilbert Freston, son of Tom Freston. Tom had Gilbert evaluated by the New York City School District in 1996, and Gilbert was classified as learning disabled. It was at that time that the school district issued an IEP for Gilbert. Tom Freston did not believe that the public school could provide Gilbert with an appropriate education to meet his needs, and he chose instead to send Gilbert to the Stephen Gaynor School, which specializes in students with similar learning disabilities. Freston sought reimbursement for Gilbert's tuition from the public school system, which he was awarded for 2 years. After issues with scheduling a meeting to review Gilbert's IEP in the summer of 1999, Freston was notified by mail that Gilbert had been issued an IEP that recommended Gilbert's continued classification as learning disabled, but advised that Gilbert be placed in a specific modified instructional services program in the New York City Lower Lapp School for Gifted Education for the 1999 through 2000 school year. Freston disagreed with this change to the IEP and continued to send Gilbert to Gaynor. Freston petitioned for tuition reimbursement, but at that point the board refused to pay Gilbert's private tuition. On April 6, 2001, Freston requested a due process hearing to challenge the district's recommendation to change his child's placement and to request reimbursement for Gilbert's tuition at the private school for the 1999 through 2000 school year. An impartial hearing officer finds that the school district failed to offer Gilbert an appropriate program to meet his needs and grants Freston's request for private tuition reimbursement. The school district appealed the IMO's decision to the State Review Office. However, the SRO affirmed the IMO's decision to grant Freston tuition reimbursement. The school district appealed once again to the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of New York, and on January 3, 2005, the U.S. District Court overturns the decision made by the IMO and SRO. The District Court cited the section of IDEA under question, and the court ruled that where a child has not previously received special education from a public agency, there is no authority to reimburse the tuition expenses arising from a parent's unilateral placement of a child in private school. The court did not consider the finding by the impartial hearing officer and the review officer that Gilbert was denied a free, appropriate public education. Freston then appealed to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit, who on August 9, 2006, vacated and remanded the Second Circuit Court's decision. By now, the case started to receive attention from the public. There were certain issues that made this extra interesting to the public, particularly the fact that Tom Freston was a well-known multimillionaire and the co-founder of MTV. Many questioned why Freston was so intent on receiving Gilbert's nearly $22,000 per year tuition from the public school system. Many argued that Freston would likely have sent his son to a private school because of his economic status, regardless of his son being classified as learning disabled or not. The board argued that the language of IDEA demanded attendance to a public school first before seeking reimbursement for private schooling. Additionally, city officials claimed a refusal of some parents to work with the school district, costing taxpayers millions in tuition reimbursement. In rebuttal, Tom Freston argued that the plain language of IDEA does not contain any requirement that a child must undergo a trial period or attend public schooling for any length of time before private tuition is reimbursed. Ultimately, the Second Circuit Court vacated and remanded the district court's decision. The court reasoned that IDEA was not meant to deny reimbursements to students who had never been enrolled in public school. They also argue that to rule otherwise would require parents to enroll children in inadequate public schools in order to be eligible for tuition reimbursement. The court's previous ruling in a similar case, Frank G. v. Board of Education of Hyde Park, influenced their decision. As the board continued to seek appeal, this time to the United States Supreme Court, the question was now, does the holding of the United States Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit, stating that the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act permits tuition reimbursement where a child has not previously received special education from a public agency, stand in direct contradiction to the plain language of IDEA, which authorizes tuition reimbursement to the parents of a disabled child who previously received special education and related services under the authority of a public agency? So on February 26, 2007, the U.S. Supreme Court granted certiorari in the case. On October 1, 2007, the Supreme Court hears oral arguments in the case. On October 10, 2007, in a split decision, the U.S. Supreme Court affirmed the ruling of the Second Circuit, stating that purpose of reading of the IDEA in light of Section 1412A10CII's ambiguous wording reveals that because of the broad discretion of IDEA confers on a district court to grant appropriate relief, reimbursement of private school tuition is still possible based on an agency's failure to provide free and appropriate education, even if the child received no prior special education. Because Justice Kennedy did not take part in the consideration of the case, and it was a 4-4 split, this case does not have a national precedent for future similar cases. If you are interested in learning more about this case and to read further into the arguments of the justices in this case, I have included the references that I used for this presentation.